former cabaret comedians from his former troupe. I read this. I couldn't believe it. When he was installed in power in 2019, most of the people he put into the government were from his theater troupe, from his TV shows. They're the ones running the government. Do they really know what's going on? Or are they living in an alternate reality?
I think a little bit of both. They don't know what's really happening, and maybe it is an alternate reality for them. The point is that the man with the power and the influence to stop this really is President Biden. And he could do it by simply saying that the United States supports neutrality for Ukraine. And that takes the burden off of Zelensky, particularly if he is under the gun from people inside his own
Interesting.
government.
If Biden said that. So that's Colonel, why is no one in Washington, D.C. interested in brokering a ceasefire?
I think it's the same Russiagate mentality that Russia has to be brought to its knees, and they think that they can do this. And I don't see any evidence for it.
Never.
Yeah, I mean,
they don't understand Russian history if they think that. Just as an amateur historian, they don't realize that Russia lost 4 million troops just taking Berlin in the last 3 months of World War II. They don't have any idea what the Russian military is like. And by the way, you're a military expert, obviously. We keep hearing that Russia's bogged down, Russia miscalculated. Is that true?
I would say a couple of things. The initial guidance that was given to Russian forces going into Ukraine was to avoid collateral damage and minimize civilian casualties. There were towns and villages and places in Ukraine where the Russian-speaking population came out and said, look, we don't want to be part of this fight. That did happen. We don't know anything about it. We're not being shown videos of it, obviously.
Oh, my God.
We're trying to argue that everyone universally is hostile and armed to the teeth. That's misleading. He did not want to inflict damage. I think the way to think of it is this. When this is over, Mr. Putin wants to live with the people in Ukraine. And that's a very important thing to keep in mind. In other words, he doesn't want so much bad blood on the ground that they cannot go forward and live together. Remember, he was an avid supporter of Solzhenitsyn, a true believer in what Solzhenitsyn was saying. And
this is a seminal point of this discussion. He's not the old Soviet communist.
No. In fact, if anything, he's probably more czarist in his outlook. That, I think, is increasingly obvious in the way he's gone about these things. But he decorated Solzhenitsyn before he passed away with one of the highest decorations that you can receive as a Russian citizen. He admired him, he adored him, and he believed in him. Remember, Solzhenitsyn was also another devout Orthodox Christian. And I'm sure if he were alive today, he'd be out there arguing for an end to this conflict. These people should not be killing each other. This is just disastrous. Now, the point is nobody wants to step up and understand that we, in the lead of NATO, have made it our policy to expand NATO well beyond whatever was needed or required. And we ultimately decided to treat the Russians increasingly as the enemy. And Russia didn't have to be the enemy. It doesn't have to be your friend, but it never had to be the enemy.
That's well put.
And so I think at this stage of the game, to go back again, the Europeans need to step in. And when I say Europeans, I'm talking about the people on the continent, because they're the ones that live with the consequences of the damage. We in Britain are both islands. We sail in, we sail out. We fly in, we fly out. We're not a permanent presence anywhere except where we live. And that's the problem. Everybody else has to live with the damage that we inflict. This is an opportunity to reverse that and step in and say, wait a minute, let's adopt neutrality for Ukraine and then sort out all the rest of the issues. I think the fighting would end if President Biden made that appeal. But if he won't, then the Europeans need to somehow or another come together and say, we need to stop the fighting for all the reasons that you rightly cite. It's a waste of time. It's pointless. And NATO, after the fall of the Soviet state, if you asked any officer in any of the European forces, what is NATO's mission? And they said NATO's mission is to prevent another war in Europe.
Prevent another war in Europe, and they certainly failed at that.
Yeah, but for what reason? We insisted we had to involve ourselves because they refused to in the Balkans. The Europeans were not anxious to get involved in the Balkans and kill people, to become a co-belligerent, if you will.
Oh, I remember that so well. When Clinton bombed Serbia for 75 days, I was on the radio. I was sick watching it because of the great history of the Serbian people rescuing our airmen, and the old men looking up saying, in Belgrade, we've not seen planes bombing our bridges since Hitler's Stukas bombed our bridges. I couldn't believe what I was watching on the Clinton. It's almost a repeat of history of the same mentality. And Colonel, I must say, I remember Hillary Clinton back in 2014, 15, 16 saying, Putin is Hitler. She was starting in with the anti-Putin rhetoric from the get-go. What the hell is this about the Democrats and wanting war?
Well, it's not just Democrats, let's be frank. This mantra that everything is a repetition of what happened in the 30s. That every time you talk to someone you don't like, you're Chamberlain at Munich.
Right.
You know, every time you don't insist on maximum damage to your opponent, you're an appeaser.
That's what I'm hearing.
On and on and on. This is the sort of trite nonsense. And they've made very good use of it now for 30 years. I mean, you've got to give them credit. This has been an historically successful narrative that is thrown in everyone's face. So you and I are obviously traitors to our country because
oh God, don't say
we
that.
are appeasers. You see,
we may wind up on a list after this is all over.
I think we're there. Let's face it.
There's a domestic terrorism group now under Biden.
Well, I'm just saying that they look at us as the enemy.
That's
because
horrible.
these people think in terms you're either with us or against us. Remember, this was W's argument when he gave his famous speech in 2001. He said either you're with us or against us, and talked about the axis of evil.
Yes,
there was no room for saying, wait a minute, we're only interested in specific individuals that we can tie directly to this heinous crime. Instead, we're going to wage war all over the globe against what we claim is a universal enemy. I mean, I often ask, how did we go from the existential threat of the global caliphate to the existential threat of China? What happened to the global caliphate? It vanished.
It became the COVID virus.
Well,
a couple of years.
That's fine. And now it's China. And China is being upstaged by Russia, the other existential threat to everyone.
So there's always this existential threat, a Hitler out there, so to speak, to unify the American people. I had an expert on last week, Fred Fleitz. You've probably seen him making the media rounds. Fred said we have battlefield nukes. We no longer have battlefield nukes, but Russia does. Is that true?
We still have tactical nuclear weapons. In fact, we have a lot of money in the budget right now to build new ones, and we've taken the view that we can incrementally employ nuclear weapons. The Russians have said any nuclear weapon at all, and we respond effectively with a strike, massive nuclear strike. In other words, one nuclear weapon, even if it's less than 5 kilotons, is still a nuclear weapon. So the Russians don't buy that. Putin has been asked on occasion, you've threatened this, you've threatened that. He said, what are you talking about? Well, you said this and this about the Baltic states. He said, are you crazy? I would use a nuclear weapon against our neighbors in the Baltic states. That's outrageous. He said, I would never do that. And then people don't understand that you have prevailing winds in that part of the world. Mm-hmm. If you detonate a nuclear weapon, let us say in Warsaw, the fallout blows across Siberia into parts of China and Japan.
My God.
In other words, people don't really understand how this works. No one is interested in a nuclear strike of any kind. I'm quite confident that President Biden isn't, and I'm confident that President Putin isn't. But Putin is fighting on his doorstep.
Yeah.
That's a little different. If we were dealing with the kind of problem that he has in Mexico, what would we do?
I know what we would do. There's no question about it. But the question is, how? First of all, you've analyzed, from my perspective, sufficient to end this thing, because the Ukrainian people are suffering. The cities will not be rebuilt in our lifetimes. Never. I don't even know how these cities can be rebuilt. And this is without using massive Aleutian bomber strikes, for example. Forget missiles. If we go back to the Vietnam era, and I remember that LBJ and the others who were running the war wouldn't bomb Hanoi and Haiphong to any extent. They didn't want to cause tremendous civilian damage. Again, it was a hands-off, so the fighter pilots flew into impossible situations, getting shot down like flies. And we never won that war because we would not bring to bear all the power of the U.S. military. Is that what's going on with Russia right now?
Well, it's a different thing. Remember, Vietnam was never a vital strategic interest for the United States. That was another war of choice. So there was no real willingness to go in full tilt, if you will. Russia's different in Ukraine. I mean, the Russians don't want to do the damage for the reasons that I've outlined. I heard a senior officer who's retired say, well, it's an objective to kill as many Ukrainians as possible. I can't find any evidence for that.
Who said that? Who said that?
It's a retired general. I can't remember which
U.S. or Russian?
U.S.
Oh, so another propaganda ploy.
I can't find any evidence for that. In fact, if anything, during the first 5 days, I think he surrendered a lot of momentum. Sometimes if you're trying to be restrained, you end up with a longer fight than you otherwise would have had. And more people are killed and hurt than would have been the case if you had gone in hard and fast to begin with.